Here she comes. Next, I want to introduce Billie Boullet, who plays Anne Frank. Next, I want to introduce Ashley Brooke, who plays Margot Frank. And next, I want to introduce Ariel Marks, who is the composer of the series. And last but not least, I want to introduce Matthew Simonelli, who is the costume designer for the series. All right, let's have a chat. Hello. It's such a powerful piece, and there's a lot of emotions, especially in those final 2 episodes. But I want to go back to the beginning for you, Bel. What initially drew you to this project?
Oh, so many things, so many things. I had wanted to work with Susanna Fogel for a very long time. I'd actually met her a few years before this, and I've been gunning to be in another project of hers, and we stayed in touch and kind of became friends, and so when she offered me the role, I knew I really wanted to work with her. Also, I'm Jewish, so I feel connected to this part of history. But I think that the biggest thing that drew me to this project was I've really shied away from period pieces in my career thus far, because I often feel very disconnected from them. I find it hard to connect. I don't know if it's like the corsets or the formal language, but I find it hard to get in there. And within reading like the first 10 pages of this pilot, I was like, whoa, I feel so like I'm there. I feel like it's really humanized these characters and this story that we know all too well, and I just felt, incredibly connected to it. And I thought that tonally what Tony and Joan, our creators, were going for with this kind of like modern tone was something that I hadn't seen before with a period piece, especially something about this subject.
There's an urgency to it.
Yeah, it's like told through this kind of day-to-day human lens, and I just thought it was a really interesting take on a part of history and a story that we all know very well.
Yeah, that's what struck me, is like you don't know this story. I didn't know this story, but I had been to the Anne Frank house and seen that apartment, seen the annex, and to see it brought to life like that is crazy. Have you ever been?
No, I actually hadn't.
You still haven't?
No, I've been.
Oh, you went there for
But no, I'd read Anne's diary when I was, in school, and I know a lot about this part of history, but I didn't know anything about Miep, and I hadn't been to the Anne Frank house. So when I was offered the job, the first thing I did was go to Amsterdam. I think it's such a iconic city that operates in a very specific way. It's built on waterways, everyone cycles everywhere, and for me, Amsterdam really is like a character in the show. So I wanted to just like immerse myself in that place, because we shot it in Prague, and I hadn't been to the Anne Frank house, so yeah, I went and visited, and they were incredibly generous to us, the foundation. They gave us all amazing private tours and loads of their material that they had, and yeah, it was great.
Yeah, that's my question for the girls who played the Franks. How much did you consult with family members, with the foundation? What was that process like?
Well, I feel like Anne Frank should. Well, I was going to actually, she's got a great story, but for me, in my process of doing it, obviously I was quite overwhelmed when I first got the role, because I was like, ooh, I'm going to be playing Anne Frank. Everybody knows
what's that like?
Stressful. She's the most famous Jewish person out there, and you ask anybody on the street, name one Jewish person, they will say Anne Frank.
Yeah.
So it was a bit daunting, I'd say. But obviously, I'm very lucky that she had a diary, thank God. So I really took that, and I put all my effort into that. I decided really early on that I wouldn't read Miep's autobiography, and I also wouldn't look at any other portrayal of Anne Frank, because I didn't want to be swayed by anybody else's perspectives or the way that they acted something, because I didn't want to get the script and be in the scene and think, oh, how would this actor do this? Or Miep thought this of Anne, so therefore I should do that. I wanted to be, Anne does this because she's Anne. And the way I would go about that is to get her diary and read it as much as I can. I audiobooked it, also got my mum to read it to me. So I had many different perspectives, like processing it. And I use it as a template of how her mind works. and how she thinks of people, or like what reactions that like get her like angsty or happy or anything like that. I try to involve myself in that and try to see the way that she thinks and completely step into it. And I'm lucky enough that I think quite similarly to her. So it was nice to do it. I took her diary as a full thing for me, and I did that for a couple months, I'd say. I just went a billion.
How about you, Ashley?
For me, it was a completely different process because, you know, for Anne, she has her diary. For Miep, she has her account. But Margot, what I kept reminding myself of is that she had her own diary, but it was never found. And for me, what I did was I read all the different perspectives. I gathered as much information that I could of her, and what really honestly helped me to step into her was taking pages from Anne's diary and putting it into Margot's perspective. Also, I was really lucky when I got this project. I'm the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, and so what was really special when I got this project is I was able to watch a testimony that was through the USC Shoah Foundation, which basically Steven Spielberg produced a bunch of Holocaust testimonies, and I wasn't able to hear her story because I was too young at the time, but when I got this role, my family reminded me that there's this testimony, and I just remember watching it, and her story was so harrowing, and she described all the fear that was going on around them, but I just kept going back to the fact that she kept describing the people that allowed her to survive, that light, that hope, and that was what Miep was to the Frank family, and that, you know, family connection and how many parallels there were from my grandmother's story and the Frank family. Actually, Anne and Margot were in Bergen-Belsen, and my grandma was actually in Bergen-Belsen. And the way that she got there was because someone had told her, you know, tell them that you're 18 so that you go one way and not into a gas chamber. And so she could have seen Anne and Margot, which was really interesting to me. But yeah.
And the set was an exact replica of the annex. What were the emotions like when you stepped onto that set?
It's unbelievable, that set. Our production designer, Mark Holmes, is a total genius. I mean, as you can see, yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, direct replica. It's maybe like 10 centimeters bigger in some places, but the cameras and obviously walls flying and stuff, but like, it's basically the same. And like, filming in the annex for a day with 9 actors is claustrophobic. So like, it really does bring home, you're like, I can't imagine what it would be like to live in there for 2 years and not go out. Like, it was, yeah, we were very lucky that we had that set.
Amazing. Aria, what were the particular challenges of composing music for this kind of piece?
So I think this is both of our first period piece, correct? Yeah, and I think Tony and Joan were really looking for like how to make the series as relatable and contemporary as possible, and so the real challenge was to kind of marry aesthetics of the time to not pull you out of the 1930s and 1940s, but also have it not feel like it's distancing you 80 years ago. And some period music can do that for me, just like costumes do with Belle, and so it was influenced by everything from the music of the time, like Benny Goodman and you know, swing jazz, also Django Reinhardt, and then also contemporary influences like Tom Waits and Scrollnut Zippers and Andrew Bird. So we really tried to like keep the ensemble very small and playful and improvisational and rough around the edges, because we felt like a larger, more symphonic and perhaps more traditional score would just be another element to take you out of it. So yeah, that was really, really fun.
And Matthew, the costumes are really extraordinary. And one thing, one thing that struck me was the family in the annex dressed up. They dressed like they were going out and leading their lives. And I looked at it as, okay, that was a choice. They chose to pick based on your research, that that was the way they dressed in the annex?
Yeah, I mean, they were leading their lives, you know, and I really, you know, after coming out of COVID, right, where these past 3 years where we were just living in sweats the whole time, we had nothing to say, like, you know, it was just like, these people every day getting dressed is fighting for your life, you know? You have your dignity. I'm also getting dressed because I have my kids here. I'm creating a path, a way to move forward, some sort of semblance of a life, some sort of routine to act as some sort of foundation to keep going, right? So that there's a floor, a foundation. You know, that's why everybody's getting dressed. And yeah, in terms of my research, people were getting dressed. I mean, there's some scenes where, like, Mrs. Van Pels is wearing, you know, a dressing gown, or we're kind of playing a little bit with the drama that's unfolding within the annex. But yeah, no, that was very much intentional, for sure.
Yeah, and there's not in the episode we saw tonight, but there's an episode with a very lavish party, and we learned that there are Nazis at the party, and I kept saying, God, the Nazis, like, they were very well dressed at this party, and it was sort of the story was told via their costuming in a way.
Yeah, it's episode 104, and what that episode really allows us to do is, you know, we're so familiar with the world of Miep and the world of the annex, and this is a complete departure. This is the other side of the lens of how these other people are moving within the world and what they're able to get. While there's restrictions on fabric and food and whatever else, and restrictions on everything, right? So the rules don't apply here. So there's fur, you know, there's silks, there's yards and yards of fabric. We try to make it as decadent and as extreme as possible to really just push the contrast of these two worlds, you know.
You mentioned it before, but Miep wrote a memoir. Did you read it?
Oh yeah, that was like my kind of main source of research. It's called Anne Frank Remembered. I think it was published in the early 80s. It was later made into a documentary that won an Oscar, actually.
Oh, really?
But yeah, I focused on the book. I read it cover to cover a few times.
What did you take out of it?
You really do get, because it's obviously her first-hand account of the events and also of her life. You know, she talks, you know, from when she was adopted from Vienna when she was 9, and you do get a sense of like her cheekiness and her vivaciousness, and you know, she talks. I mean, we talk about this. She talks about how like she loved fashion, and like she loved copying like the outfits that were on the mannequins in like the fancy places, and she loved dancing. She talks about like how much she fancied her husband, and like, you know, just like. You get a sense of her, not just the context and the events that we're showing, which was so important to me, and that's, again, the reason I wanted to be a part of this project, because I feel like all of these characters in this telling of this story is so humanized. You can relate to them. Like, I can relate to feeling directionless at 20 and falling in love for the first time and, you know, navigating a relationship. Like, you know, as much as this story is set against this intense and horrible political and historical backdrop, like, it's also for me about marriage, and it's about coming of age, and it's about parenting, and you know, those are the things that, you know, we as people can connect to, and hopefully that is what will make people feel like, oh, I'm not just watching something about something that happened 80 years ago, you know, because by the way, there are so many parallels to what's going on in the world today, so it's so important. For us making it, we just wanted people to connect to these characters and their relationships.
In Anne's diary, this is the quote, she writes, "Miep is just like a pack mule. She fetches and carries so much."
She did a lot of shopping, yeah.
She did. Having read the memoir and immersed yourself in the character, why do you believe Miep was so virtuous? And why did she do this?
I personally think it was something to do with her own background. I think, you know, to have been a starving child at 9 years old and been sent to another country, and adopted by a family in a country that you didn't speak the language, to experience the selflessness of your biological mother who let you go, and also this family who took you in. I think that selflessness must have just been like imbued in her for the rest of her life. I also do think that, and you know, the title of this show comes from a quote that Miep used to end her talks with, where she'd say, "No one should ever think they have to be special in order to help others. Anyone, even an ordinary secretary or a housewife or a teenager, can turn on a small light in a dark room." And you know, what I take from that is that I really think Miep believed that we all have the good inside of us. Like, we all know what the right thing to do is. We know it. Like, we've got that moral compass. She just was like kind of like fearless or something. Like, she could act on it without hesitation. And I think that's what we can learn from her. Like, we know what's right and wrong, but it's about just doing the right thing.
Great answer. This one is for the girls. Those scenes of the family in the annex, how did you approach the acting in those scenes? How did you approach the kind of space element, the space constraints, and kind of the fact that you were all constricted in the space you were in? How much did that impact the way you played the characters, kind of the being there?
Well, my case was quite helpful because that's how they lived. They lived in a very tight space, so having that on set, you know, you really get the claustrophobia that they felt, and possibly, you know, the irritation to be, you know, so close with your sister all the time. Because, you know, all siblings, they fight. You know, and having that, you know, obviously we didn't actually fight on set, but
I know about that one.
In the scene, you know, you get a piece of the script so that maybe, you know, Margot and Anne, they're fighting, or they have a little thing, or, you know, you just think to yourself, oh, you know, maybe today, you know, they're not getting on so well, because Anne was really jealous of Margot with Peter, so maybe she was thinking about that today, you know? So having all of that, and being on such an incredible set that is exactly like the annex, you know, everything comes into play. You become the person a lot more, and you probably get to involve yourself in where you are and who you are, because you forget that the cameras are there when it's such a good set, and you have these great actors around you that are doing the same thing as you, that are completely immersing themselves in it, and that they're in their characters, they're in it. So then when you're looking at them, you're like, okay, all the research that I've done, it's in my head. I've got the relationship that I know with them, and I can just do it straight away. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to think, oh God, that's Belle now playing Miep, and I am Billie playing Anne. You know, it just happened, because everybody involved in it had the same idea, had the same, we're creating the show with these real people, and we have to put, you know, our best foot forward, and everybody thought the same way. So having all of these things together, it really helped the acting, and it was great. Definitely with, like, the costumes and everything, because you put on this costume and there's so much thought behind it, and you know, Matthew kind of thinks like an actor, really, in the way that he makes these stories and you can tell what he thought. You look at this is my favorite moment. Okay, so Anne, you probably can't notice, definitely in the episodes that you've just seen, but at a certain point, Anne wears these pair of socks, which are also Peter's socks. You know, so you can see a little bit of like the flirtation that's going on. So, you know, when I see that in my trailer, you can tell how Anne is feeling that day. You can tell how Anne is feeling in that scene. She's feeling flirtatious. She's feeling like, oh, hi Peter, I've got your socks on. You know, so it's great having people like that involved, because it just, everything comes into play. You have all of the, like, the groundwork from that day, from the morning up until that point, or what's going to happen for the rest of the day. You know, you come onto set, because obviously things are not filmed in the right order, so when you have the costume, you can think, oh yeah, that's what happens, or that's going to happen, or that's how she's thinking. So having so many people on set that are that involved in it, and think that thoroughly through everything, everything just flows so easily, and it just creates something that's so great to watch, because there's so much depth and level to it. So now I shall stop speaking.
That was a great answer. Ashley, Ashley, what do you think in your head, what's going through your character's mind that day, August 4th, when they arrive?
So much. Honestly, what really stuck with me throughout this whole process of filming was the idea of trying to make sense of a nonsensical world. And also, I mean, Margot was more of a rule follower, and now you're breaking the law. And there's a lot of high stakes, there's a lot of tension. And what was great is that was all shown on the writing from Tony and Joan. And what I really did love about this project was that, I mean, even when you're going through such scary circumstances, sometimes you say something that's kind of like out of the ordinary or a little bit out of the blue. And I remember reading this when I was actually auditioning and, in my process, I remember when there's this checkpoint scene in the pilot episode, and a moment that really stuck out to me was when Miep and Margot are riding past, and Margot says, all the things of how she's different than Anne so that she can get past this checkpoint, and she says, well, Anne has a boyfriend and I don't. And I could relate to that. A little too much. But I think that relatability factor really helped to step into these people. They're real life people. And you just have to keep going back to that at the end of the day, is that you're not playing a character. You're playing a person, and you want to respect the circumstances and the story, and what you put out is, everything that you've gotten from your research, and also the wonderful actors and creative team that are surrounding you.
Ariel, take us through your process on scoring the August 4th episode, and what you chose to highlight, not highlight, and how you approached the music there.
Yeah, so I had seen a version of that episode where that checkpoint was kind of sparse, it was edited in different, like 5 or 6 different times throughout the episode. But by the time I started working on it, it was these 2 bookends to the episode. And it was great musically, because then we could really set the tone of how we're going to be handling tension in the show. And the guiding light for the tension in the show is very much to make that feel as contemporary as possible. So there is, and you heard it tonight too, there is an incorporation of heart-pounding electronics and other kind of more experimental techniques on percussion, and atonal, scratchy sounds on acoustic instruments, and techniques you wouldn't necessarily pair with this time period. So that is, I think, we settled on. I mean, we had gone through a lot of rounds of temp, and we tried, seeing like, what would this sound like if it were a more traditional approach, and it just kept fighting with it, and really it just had to be its own thing and its own voice. So in those sequences too, much like 7 and 8, they're hiding their panic, and they have to, especially Miep and Margot at the checkpoint, they have so much anxiety and panic, but it's not, it's so underneath the surface, and so a lot of that tension is subdued. And same with 7 and 8, when Miep is just trying to prevent them from going from room to room to room.
Matthew, do you have a favorite piece that you created for this?
It's hard to say if I have a favorite piece. As Billie mentioned, there's all these moments, these small moments where you pick a sock, right? Or you put together an outfit that has a lot of flowers on it, or you find the right platform shoe, or obviously Belle's amazing party dress in episode 104. It's this ice blue, beautiful number. But I don't know, I think it's hard to pick, because I was so engaged in the moment of creating full stuff that I think it's all one piece. It's hard to start pulling it apart. So maybe that's a lame answer, but I really do I think the whole thing is one piece of art altogether. It is one thing. So I'm really proud of it.
And Bel, did you have one scene that was particularly emotional or meaningful to you?
there's no favourite one. I mean, there were obviously scenes that were more difficult to film than
What was
others.
most difficult?
The most difficult scene for me to film was actually, I think, one that you guys have just seen in episode 8, after they find out that the girls died at Bergen-Belsen, and I go to the train station to tell Jan. I think it was probably difficult because it was towards the end of the shoot, and you know, we've kind of been ramping up to that moment, and it's this really horrible kind of like deflated feeling. But also, I'd gotten to know Billie and Ashley so well by that point that it was so easy for me to just step into Miep's shoes, and all I had to do was think about them, and I'm just like, it was really emotional. And obviously we had all of these essays, these extras who actually shaved their heads, and it just felt very kind of visceral. It was hard. But my favourite episode is episode 6, which is like just before everything goes terribly wrong. I think that Tony and Joan did such an amazing job at, like, this is a story where we all know how it ends, but like they created hope. Like, even acting in it, you like kind of thought for a second it wouldn't end like that. Like, I don't know how they managed to like maintain that tension and that hope. Like, they had to remind us actually day to day, like, don't play the end of this story at the beginning, yeah? Like, live in the present and be in the moment. But yeah, episode.
And there is hope throughout.
Yeah, well, these people lived with hope. They didn't know how it was going to end. They thought they were going to be okay. They were getting dressed every day and still doing their schoolwork because they thought they were going to slot right back into school. Like, of course that's the only way to survive. And that's also why, you know, we have so many light moments in this show as well. So I think that's how human beings deal with darkness. Like, you know, we've all experienced COVID. Like, we've all been to like a funeral where like suddenly people start giggling about something. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, I think we naturally as human beings find the light in darkness, and that's why we've kind of tried to carry that through all the way until the end. Respectfully, of course, but yeah, so I've gone off on a complete tangent.
Have you guys heard from either the foundation or the families what their reaction to watching this was?
Miep's granddaughter, she came to set a couple of times, which was incredible, and she like watched and we said hello and stuff. But she also came to our premiere in Amsterdam, and the first thing she said was, she was like, I don't think my grandmother would have jumped in the canal. Because I guess like when it's your grandma, like you just think about the little grandma. Sure. You don't think about them at this age.
Yeah, nobody's grandma would ever jump in.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it was kind of a surreal experience for her. It was so special. It was so special, like meeting her and having her around. And
how about the Frank Foundation? Have they contacted you, or have you heard what they think?
Yeah, well, they came to the Amsterdam premiere, and well, you know, they said they really liked it. They did. They really enjoyed it. They loved the piece. Yeah, they really liked it.
No notes.
No. No. Thank God, no notes.
All right. Well, I want to thank our panel tonight for coming out. Thanks to everyone here for joining.